I'm looking at the last two verses on 42 and then first verse on 43. Maybe there's a bit of overlap here, but on the themes, it carries. So maybe just read the first two verses in Chinese, the Fopa, that section. See it? Going out. You got it?
Page 42.
Should be on 42, 43. The Buddha, English is the Buddha Dharma subtle, wonderful. Fopa, way out. No?
It's on page 40. On page 40, okay.
I'm looking at my digital version here.
Okay. Page 40. Second from the bottom.
Got it now?
Yeah.
Okay. Slowly, so you get the, and forgive my pronunciation. 佛法微妙，难可量，一切言说莫能及。非是和合，非不合，平行寂灭，无主相。Next line. 佛山无上，巧习论，非是永久慈悲法，得自在灵觉。was it 定见，所行无为，离缘道。So I'm gonna, I mentioned, work a little bit on the translation of this, and maybe not talk so much about it tonight. This is a particularly difficult section to translate. It's very terse, and it's almost ironic in that it's telling you you can't get it with words and language. So here you are trying to use words and language to translate something, and the text itself says words and language can't get at it, or can't really fathom it. But nonetheless, here's a modified translation attempt. The Buddha Dharma is subtle, wonderful, difficult to fathom. Second line, beyond the reach of words and speech. Third line, I've changed. It is neither identical nor apart, or it is neither identical nor separate. And then the last line, in substance and nature it is still and quiet, not defined by any sights or sounds, or not defined by any marks. And then if I go to the next one, the Buddha's body is not produced and transcends sophistry. It is not the collection of the skandhas, dharmas of discrimination or differentiation. Through obtaining the power of self-mastery, one is certain to see it, him. Such activity is fearless, free from the path of words. Okay, so those are the two we read tonight. You can see if you look at the English translation, and maybe I'll just contrast these, and those who are listening can kind of feel the difference. The first one is, this is the BTTS straight translation. Buddha Dharma is subtle, wonderful, difficult to measure. No words and speech are able to reach it. It is not combined, nor is it uncombined. In substance nature, it is still and quiet without any marks. That I changed to, the Buddha Dharma is subtle, wonderful, and difficult to fathom, beyond the reach of words and speech. In other words, speech, words, and able to reach it, it's beyond the reach. But it's still accessible. It is neither identical nor apart or separate. This is a bigger change from combined and uncombined. And I'll talk a little bit about why I'm suggesting this. And then the last line in the original was, in substance and nature is still and quiet without any mark. And I changed that, in substance and nature it is still and quiet, not defined by any sights or sounds. Okay, so if we look at that, and I've been, okay, so if we look at that, in translation, when we find passages like this, it's really hard to try to convey what the text is getting at, because the text itself, as I said, is pointing to the limitations of language and speech. So even in trying to translate this, all we can get at is, as good as the language can get, it's still trying to point to something that language itself is unable to reach. So makes it very difficult. And this is also dealing psychologically with a very difficult experience or concept for anybody to grasp, which is a kind of a pronouncement, a proposition, that what we see and what we hear and what we use through our sensory apparatus is not how things really are, but rather dreams, illusions, bubbles, shadows. They're really fabrications of a certain functioning of our consciousness that is driven by greed and anger and delusion. Now, this is counterintuitive because we think and we feel, because of habituation, that this is in fact how it actually is. And so that's why these passages are very difficult to translate, because they're pushing against the intuitive understanding or misunderstanding. No, not working?
They can't hear you for some reason.
Turn up the gain.
Hi.
Keep talking.
Testing, 1, 2, 3. No, not working?
No, it's pretty high.
Yeah, it's okay, Marty. Let's continue.
All right. So I don't know how much of that was heard or lost, but again, it's appropriate that words and language are difficult to get at, and even when you speak them, they're gone. So you hear them, you don't hear them. I'll try again. I'm just saying it's difficult to translate because, one, it's talking about the limitations of what we normally use to wrap our minds around things, which is concepts, ideas, words, language, conceptions. And it's also psychologically difficult to translate this because it is pushing against the intuitive understanding and the intuitive view that we have, that what we see is what's there. What we understand is real. What our ideas and our sensory functioning tells us, gives us the nature of reality. And when in fact, according to these teachings, it is not the nature of things as they really are, but it is the distorted misrepresentation of things filtered through an unsettled, unclear functioning of consciousness that is distracted by greed and anger and basically all of the now the klesha. And so we're getting a klesha tinted perception. But because of our habituation and because our ego construction or ego formation is so powerful, we actually resist this presentation. Not only resist it, we don't like it, and we dismiss it, and just think it's mysticism or BS, or some kind of apart from the real world religiosity of some sort. But it's actually very psychologically both profound and elusive. When presented with this in a scientific framework, we accept it, but we accept it as out there describing something. We don't accept it psychologically. This is one of the problems with the modern mind, is that it's got a series of inquiring modes or disciplines that look at the nature of what is reality and come up with some very disturbing, unflattering results or conclusions. We accept them kind of in the basis of we conduct our discussions and our scientific investigations around these premises and hypotheses and discoveries. But psychologically, it has nothing to do with our day-to-day life. We still think there's a solid meat, substantial, that is at the center of things, that it sees what's there, and instead of its interactive reality conditioned seeing and so on and so forth. And we don't really think much about what happens before we're born and after we die, even though most of what science would say is that there's nothing to say about that. It's not only is it inconclusive, it's not even observable. Even though we know this philosophically or intellectually, psychologically, we still live in a kind of, if you wanted to say, spiritual Middle Ages. It doesn't conform to even the modern understandings we have of the nature of reality and so on. Anyhow, I don't want to go on with it. I'm just saying this makes translation very difficult. Buddha Dharma is used here. It's very interesting. If you separate Buddha Dharma, could be the teachings of awakening, or it could be basically the teachings of a or the, but I would say a Buddha. And then, as such, if you take it away and don't call it Buddhism, I'm going to talk about this a little later, but rather make it small d, the Dharma being both descriptive of the things as they really are. So Dharma has a descriptive connotation to it, but it also has a prescriptive, as in medicinal. And so Dharma means things as they really are, but it also means the methods, the transformative methods or liberative techniques one cultivates in order to align with things as they really are. So it has a descriptive and prescriptive, and that alignment, both the seeing of things as they really are, and then the living in that reality of things as they really are, which is called wonderful existence. That is basically Buddha, the awakened existence. So Buddha Dharma then has all of those connotations. But here it's saying it's subtle, wonderful, and difficult to fathom beyond the reach of words and speech. So again, we're faced with words and speech as we presently use them are basically set up to hold together the and so therefore words and speech really can't get at this because by definition they're meant to create a self and others, a dualistic construct. Again, as we find in the Avatamsaka, this is not a problem from the Avatamsaka point of view, because there is another way to get at that. And that's why later in the 10 grounds, it's very explicit how this can be understood, appreciated, even though not explained. And it can be realized, but it cannot be put into words. So there is an apprehension, there's a getting of this, but words and language can only take you so far, and then it has to be directly realized. And this is the third type of prajna called real mark wisdom. It has to be directly seen, as Wei Nung would say, seen. It has to be actually directly seen, unmediated by words, language, concepts, and so forth. This is what cultivation is about. Cultivation is bringing one's comprehending abilities to its highest function. which goes beyond words and language. Even though it starts with words and language and gets you so far, there's something that happens in the removal of all obstacles to knowing called klesha, affliction, spana, outflows. When that is gone, the direct occurs by itself. It isn't something that has to be gotten through words and language, because it is, in fact, how things really are. And all you've done through cultivation is remove the impediments to the actual encounter, direct encounter with things as they really are. We still okay on sound?
Yeah, it's still not coming out. It's okay, but it's just not as loud as it could be.
Well, I can't talk any louder.
No, we don't.
How's that? Is it better? Testing 1, 2, 3.
Seems like it's not going to this microphone.
Try it again. Testing 1, 2, 3. Is that better? No? Yes? No? Maybe? Hello? Testing. I'm turning a button here. I don't know what I'm doing. Any change? Same?
No. Seems like it's going to the wrong microphone for some reason.
Well, should I go on, or do we want to go back and do some sitting meditation and go beyond the reach of words and speech? Truly.
Yeah.
Can you hear it now? Yeah. So the question is, the first 20 minutes now, is that been heard or not heard?
It's been heard, but it switches a little low. But they heard you.
Okay, so I don't want to try to repeat?
Yeah, you just continue.
So in the third line, and this is the original was combined, not combined, uncombined. Well, how did they put it? It is not combined, nor is it uncombined. as it stands in English, that's totally incomprehensible. If I'm to anybody, I'm just looking at you guys. Do you get it? Jinwei? Jinchuan? Are you here? He's gone? Okay, so if I look at it, that's why I worked with it on the idea it's neither identical nor separate. And then I would have to add parenthetically from the 10,000 things, from the world, quote unquote. In other words, I'm taking this to be a statement of non-duality, bu-ar. And in that, this Buddha Dharma, what we call the teachings, and what the Buddha Dharma reveals is not split into two different worlds. In other words, it's not identical with the 10,000 things that we are in the midst of, nor is it apart from them. So this is very tricky in a sense, but this matches other text, and it also conforms a bit with the commentary. It is to say that it is right within the ordinary everyday, and yet it is not the ordinary and everyday. And so this is where I quoted last week and read extensively, both from Ajahn Chah and from Master Hua, on this idea. And Master Hua, in his commentary, then immediately starts up on this passage by saying, quoting the Platform Sutra expression, the Buddha Dharma, or the teachings, I'll look at is repeated for you. The Buddha Dharma is here in the world. Awakening is not apart from the world. And this goes to the Buddha Dharma, those first two lines. Yet it's beyond the words and language of the world, and yet here it is. And the sutras are ordinary words and language, and yet it's saying that is not exactly it. And then the last two lines are, to look for Bodhi apart from the world is like looking for a hare or a rabbit with horns. So this is Master Hua's commentary leading off of this particular passage in chapter 9. This is why I worked on this rather than combined or uncombined, neither identical nor apart, neither the same as nor separate from. And then you have to parenthetically add here all phenomena, the conditioned world. And it's right within the ordinary. You see this also in the Avatamsaka. Truth and falseness interlink and mingle. With the ordinary mind, we discover the Buddha mind. Principles, the teachings, and the specifics, the concrete phenomena, how does it say? Principles and specifics mutually respond or interact. One uses basic wisdom to open Buddha wisdom. So what this is hinting at is something very profound and yet very difficult. It's, on one hand, we say we're not seeing things as they are. We're seeing conditioned dharmas as real. These are called the four inversions. We take what is impure to be pure. We take what is impermanent to be impermanent. We take what is not true self to be true self. And we take what is a source of joy, not real joy. We use suffering to try to end suffering. This is called the four diandao, the four inversions. And yet it's saying it's right within there that if one can turn it, the Buddha Dharma manifests. And in fact, the texts are saying you're not going to get it apart from that. So it's right where the confusion is, right where the afflictions are, right where the entanglements are, that the solution lies as well. Right working in and through them and not apart from them. This is why transcendent is such a tricky term, because transcendent takes place within the here and now, not beyond the here and now. And what is transcendent is a liberation from attachment to that, but not a leaving, quote, of that. So then the last line says, in substance and nature it is still and quiet. This is still and quiet is the expression used for nirvana. and not defined by any sights and sounds. And again, using Master Hua's commentary, which I have to rely on to try to get purchase on this better than my own understandings, he says, because all marks, sights and sounds, or all marks, because all marks are conditioned dharmas, which by their very nature are mind-made and like dreams and illusions, bubbles, shadows, and so forth. So dharmas really are like scratches on the mind or marks of the mind. That's why last week I said, instead of seeing it as marks, see it as marking, because then what you're saying is, by taking what is true and real and marking it, sort of staining it in a way, or twisting it, it becomes what is not true and real. And yet, by removing the marking, stop marking, it naturally reveals itself again. So the problem is not that there's marks out there. The problem is that psychologically, habitually, we are marking with our upside down consciousness. And we are actually, as the Avatamsaka says, like the artist, creating these pictures that we then call real. So it's like, and here's the commentary, it is apart from terms and expressions, meaning language, apart from what is thought by the mind and the mental activities that we think, and apart from all xiang, all marks. You should pay particular attention to this point. To be apart from all marks is what is meant by all dharmas. Wow, so what he's done here is saying all marks mean all dharmas. Now we're back to the Vajra Sutra. All dharmas, all conditioned dharmas, marks, are like dreams, illusions, bubbles, shadows, dewdrops, and lights of flash. Contemplate them thus. So what Master Hua is doing here is saying all dharmas, all conditioned dharmas, aka also known as all marks. But it is in the midst of all those markings that we take the scratches off the mind, remove the marking process. And when that marking process stops, that very stopping is Buddha or Bodhi. So this is really very, very tricky because it's not like there's a truth or reality apart from the conditioned, frantic, entanglements that we're in right now. They're actually, and that's why the Shurangama is so curious about this, you have to untie knots. And basically it's saying we've taken the Tathagata Garbha, the Buddha nature, as if it were a long cord or a long scarf, and we tie it into knots and therefore shorten it, constrict it, and deform it. If you untie the knots, the cord is right there again, opens up. And then the Shurangama is very clear about this. It says you cannot untie those knots unless you understand how you tied them in the first place. So this is the Buddha Dharmas in the world. The liberation is in the knots. Bodhi's in the afflictions. Fannao Joshu Puti. Puti Joshu Fannao. This is this kind of paradoxical. It's paradoxical if we try to use words and language and think of it from a habituated consciousness. But it is comprehensible if for a moment you can pause and ask yourself, what would things be like if I weren't constantly projecting, attaching, defiling, staining, marking with my greed, anger, and stupidity? What would then it be like? And that's where the texts come in. It would be like Bodhi. It would be like Nirvana. It would be the true nature, Rushur, things as they really are. And again, it stresses, unless you change this, you won't see that. It's not like you leave this to get that. It's in untangling and perfecting this that is realized. I mean, this is why language is really quite hard. The second part goes on, and I'll just touch on this tonight because what I really wanted to get to, obviously, I won't have time now because we didn't have words and language for a while. So the other line just goes, Buddha's body is not produced and transcends sophistry. Sophistry being false erudition, argument for argument's sake, cleverness with words, sounds great, but doesn't have any penetrating substance to it. It's the Greek word for a kind of pretentious intelligence that's used to win arguments or to manipulate. But when you look at it closely, it doesn't have any true substance to it. Unfortunately, for whatever it's where the word sophomore comes from too. But it's also the basis of Sophia, which is wisdom. But it's a kind of distorted, twisted cleverness instead of real wisdom. It says it's not the collection of the skandhas or the dharmas of differentiation. And now this third line, which is very important. By obtaining the power of self-mastery, one is certain to see it, him. Again, what this third line is really is the most important. How do you, if it's beyond words and language, how do it if it's not really there to grasp and to hold or even to express? How do you get to then apprehend it, to jin, to see, directly know? And it says through the power, the gongfu of self-mastery. So now we have to figure out, what does that mean? Basically, this is the zuzai here, which could be translated as self-present, but it could also be translated as aware, self-aware. It means basically, self-mastery means you have subdued or mastered the self. So the ordinary self, the self that is confused and grasping and attaching, not true self, but that ordinary, unawakened self. When the teachings say, mistakenly say to dukkha, the first truth, life is suffering, the actual better translation would be the unawakened life is suffering. And the unawakened life is the ordinary self with all of its attachments and clingings that goes about constructing a fabricated world within which the self cannot stand alone. It's constantly assaulted by impermanence, non-self, and so forth. So, what cultivation is about is initially subduing the self and returning to principle. Subduing this false self and returning to principle. Remaking the self into something that is true and real. Basically, it's called perfected self, Buddha. Okay? The unperfected self, the confused self, the ordinary self, doesn't have mastery over itself, nor its environment, nor its fate or conditions. It's completely swept along. So self-mastery at the very basic level means a master of one's false self. And that means you're free from klesha and delusion. It's a freedom from. Once that is mastered and the klesha and delusion are unpacked, gone, then one is free, zuzai, which can also mean relaxed and at ease. Because the corresponding impediments or resistance that is generated by klesha and attachment and delusion is no longer there. So in a sense, it's very complicated. By cultivating freedom from klesha, greed, anger, stupidity, jealousy, and so on and so forth, when the human is unimpeded and that perfected self starts to emerge, the corresponding impediments or resistance go, and that's where the ease comes in. That's where the ease results. That's why the Heart Sutra says, through reliance on this cultivation of this prajna, the elimination of klesha, one is unimpeded in heart and mind. And because there's no impediments, there's no fear. And because there's no fear, upside down dream thinking is left behind. And that's why you have the last line. Such activity is fearless, freed from the path of words. So, the fearlessness is really interesting because Zudzai is associated with fearlessness, and it's a freedom from tension and resistance. It's not uninhibited. It's just that there's nothing you're clinging to, nothing you're attaching to. And as a result of that, you have this wonderful free functioning, able to respond to things as they come totally appropriately, because you're not making mistakes in cause and effect and so on and so forth. So this is what the self-mastery refers to, but buried in this verse here is the key to how to get beyond words and language and get beyond what seems to be not reachable. And that's why the line you point, obtaining by the power of self-mastery, which is what the Heart Sutra is describing, how one gets to that point, then you get the relaxed and at ease. You get the freedom from obstructions and impediments. Moreover, when that happens, that narrow collapsed consciousness of me and mine, the dualistic consciousness, is gone. And without trying, compassion and wisdom just flower of them own, because that's our nature. So not seen through the myopic little narrow lens of me and mine, that being gone because it's artificial, when that is gone, you don't have to try to be compassionate. It is natural. In fact, being uncompassionate is almost like a violation of your nature. It's that repulsive and abhorrent to you that you could not think of being uncompassionate. This level of Zudzai means one is holding the precepts without even trying to hold the precepts. They are natural. You wouldn't even have, when Huineng says, before the mind of good and evil arises, that's what he's talking about. It doesn't mean that that's repressed. It means that there isn't a stirring of that because there's no impediment creating that dichotomy between self and others and so forth. Wow, that's pretty amazing. And that's why it's called Zudzai. It's natural. It's not artificial. It's not strained and exercised. Well, there's so much more I wanted to get into tonight, but time slipped away. Let me just go to this last verse here because it does sort of follow. Master's commentary on this is very interesting, and I was really looking at it. He says, a Buddha attains the power of self-mastery. A Buddha, an awakened being, gains self-mastery. Gaining self-mastery is awakening. Mastering the false self, transforming it, is awakening. If you cultivate the way, in this very interesting, he says, you too can attain it and be able to see the Buddha's Dharma's body. One's activity then is fearless and apart from the path of words. You can gain this state where your practice is fearless. You're not afraid of anything, inside or out. A lot of what trips people up in their practice is because of the clinging and the attachment. There then becomes the impediments, and the impediments cause a certain fear and anxiety. I can't do it, or this is coming to me, or it's a demon, or it's my karma coming and I have no way to get out of it. And then it leads to doubts, second thoughts, misgivings, and so forth. And so instead of being a fearless path, it's a path fraught with anxiety and fear. And we forget that before we were cultivating the path, that path indeed was fraught with fear and anxiety. So in a sense, we forget what we've left when we start to cultivate, because different fears and anxieties arise. And it's very easy to forget that these are not of the same degree or intensity of what was before. That being said, he says you can attain the state where your practice is fearless and where you are apart from language. In this state, the path of language is cut off and the place of the mind's activity is extinguished. What he's talking about, what I think he's talking about here, is that you act spontaneously because your heart is unimpeded There's no attachment, there's no grasping, there's nothing. Everything's okay, he says, no problem at this stage. So you don't need words and language to have a defense up to defend or to attack or to explain. The way virtue that comes from this unimpeded state is its own talking, is its own message. And the unobstructed vision that comes from seeing it this way doesn't need words and language as a second layer of interpretation. That's why someone with this acts so quickly, can respond so quickly, because it doesn't have to be mediated by words, language, thoughts, excuses, rationalizations, and so on and so forth. This is that called immediacy. When they say the direct teaching, the direct awakening, means it's not mediated by anything whatsoever. It's the unobstructed, clear mind and body, totally seeing things as they really are. And because there's no leaning to one side or wanting or seeking, there's no impediment there either. Those don't seem like an impediment when you're doing it, but if you really think about it, everything you want and everything you seek after slows you down, leads to calculation, constant benefit-loss analysis, and in a sense you kind of tie yourself up in a constricted merry-go-round. Finally, this verse goes, his body and mind are level and equal, meaning everything even, no ups and downs. Inside and out, all is liberated. This liberated, again, Master Hua's commentary means to be free of attachment. It is also what Ajahn Chah calls the taste of freedom, vimutti rasa. If you have no attachments, then you naturally become liberated. You don't have to try to become liberated. You simply let go of what's tangling or tying you up. That's why you have the wonderful Chan expression where the disciple says, Master, Master, please liberate me. And the Master's response is, who's tying you up? And of course, it's meant to return the light and cause this reflection of, I am my own master and I am my own slave. Nobody else is responsible. So this is a kind of radical responsibility here. If you're able to attain liberation, he says, then you have proper mindfulness. If you don't have proper mindfulness, then you'll have upside-down dream thinking. And if you attain proper mindfulness, then there are no impediments, and upside-down thinking is left far behind. So he's actually quoting the Heart Sutra as I was earlier. And so what he's saying is proper mindfulness, and we went back to this when Ajahn Chah last week used the word sati. And he said sati means to maintain awareness of reality, of things as they really are, where sense perceptions are understood to be illusions and the true nature of phenomena can be seen. So sati is not just a sort of absorbed withdrawal from attention, but it's a attentive awareness to the nature of reality at all times. And he uses the practice of observing immediately in your surroundings, sight, sound, smells, taste, all conditioned dharmas, how they arise, seem to go for a while, decline, and are gone. And watching this cycle is sati. And if you watch that, you'll see also this illusion of self you have is also a conditioned dharma and takes effort to try to maintain, and no matter how hard you try to maintain it, it eventually doesn't hold, won't stay. It's very frustrating, dukkha. So I'll just stop there because what I wanted to go into next, and maybe I'll do this next week, it has something to do with, if we look at these teachings that we just got the last 2 nights, the last 2 classes, what do we call this? What's the name for this? And the reason I'm bringing this up is because I was just asked to give a talk, a lecture at Berkeley, Cal, and that was the question, the topic that came up. What is this thing called Buddhism? And since I don't have time tonight, next class I'll go into this, because I think if you look at what we're looking at tonight, calling it Buddhism really doesn't get at it. It's something far different than that. But not enough time tonight, so we'll stop here. I will stop here. Somebody else is. But then you need my microphone, don't you? I'll give you mine.
How it is? Is okay? Okay. Just want to share, Marty mentioned about that the Bodhisattva, by subduing the self or from self-mastery, can achieve this fearlessness. And it's interesting, we have a kind of rich discussion in our debut class yesterday, in Avatamsaka class. We are now looking into the first ground, the joyfulness ground, is translated by one of the Monk Heng Sure. And it's very interesting because in this particularly chapter, that there are they actually list the different types of fear, what living beings experience. And the first is the fear of failing survive, fear of bad reputation, fear of death, fear of being reborn in kind of unpleasant bad destinies, and interesting fear of speaking in very wholesome dharmic assemblies. And it's interesting that the main medicine to overcome this fear, the sutra says, is abandoning of self. Abandoning the self, leaving the self, abandoning the self, or subduing the self, or transforming the self. And he tries to remind me the story of the man, and we can share shortly, who I think very embody the many of these qualities to leave fear behind, which his name kind of came randomly. I completely forget about him. We have a few visitors in our Redwood Vihara. One person is from India, and she really dedicated her life to serving children, especially special children. She's now studying in Pennsylvania, and one of the, I think, teachers, I know who do the presentation about this man. His name is Janusz Korczak, who is quite well known in Poland. He was a kind of great humanist and pedagogue who devoted his life to children as well. And he had a kind of tough life. His father committed suicide at age 50. And he couldn't find kind of the sense of his life. And he became graduate from some medicine. He was a doctor, but he devoted completely his life to children, become and maintain kind of being single. Because he says, I so much love children. Why I want to have many of them? So he found two kind of big orphanages in Warsaw before Second War, one from Jewish children, one for Polish children. And story goes, of course, as we know, 1939, the Germans came, and he was Jewish, although he came from kind of assimilated completely to Polish society, family. He was sent with the children to the ghetto. And you can imagine the misery, because it was very difficult to survive, right? The hunger was a very common sensation, and fear of survive, fear of death, was at every second, every moment of the people who were sent to this very tiny place, in this case in Warsaw. Like, I forget what were 200,000 of Jewish, and included 200 these Jewish children. And he tried to do anything what he could to sustain them, to feed them. And what's happened, the ghetto was ordered to destroy the ghetto. It sent all the Jewish to concentration camps, mainly to concentration camp in Treblinka, what is 100 kilometers from Warsaw. And all these people were sent to these trains and sent to concentration camps. And Janusz Korczak really knows what's going to happen. All these children will be killed. And it's amazing what he did, knowing that this is the final day. They have to leave the place. He led the children to wear the best clothes. They put the flags, maintain this kind of joyful attitude, sing the songs, sing the hymns. They all walked like in the each four of them in the lines, 200 children, and he was in the front. He's going to Amsakplatz, the place when all the Jews were sent to the trains, and kind of serve to the end with them, create this kind of sacred, safe place. And he was sent to the Treblinka, and all of them were killed. But for me, what is amazing and relating to the passage, overcoming fear, that someone who deeply devote his life to others, to children, to the point that he had an offer to escape the ghetto. He says, no, how I can escape the ghetto? I will stay with my children. So overcome fear of death and survival. Become the fear of bad reputation. So it's begging very often for bread, for food, for them bringing them to just support their lives. And you can say that as I was free from any worry about be reborn and kind of bad destinies, because definitely if someone serves selfishly and want to help in these last moments of others, don't have to worry about anything, right? You go for the good place, for sure. So I just want to share this short story of someone who kind of is quite heroic, and someone who deeply, selflessly serve to others and overcome in the most threatening fears, right? Like fears of death, and make this last journey for his children kind of joyful and also free from fear as well. Yep, so stop here. And any announcements? So, what we have in Chuanshu, I think nothing. We got a lot. Oh, so this is next week. So next weekend, what is the dates? April 15 to April 17, we have Amitabha session. It will be at the beginning transmission of 8 precepts. Here at Berkeley Monastery, online. You can join us. Yes, online still. Although we're slowly preparing, right? Can we announce that? Or?
Opening up for the meditation sits. Oh, so people will be able to come here and meditate?
Right, in person, but the mask and vaccination is required. So we start with Thursday and Friday. We'll create the form. You can, if you want to come, you can send your vaccination card and your name.
It's spring. Things are opening up and blossoming again. That's great.
Yeah, and we start with that and see how it goes. Maybe we can open up a little bit more. So next Thursday, right? Jinchuan will be the first open seats in the morning, 6:15. Main 7 Buddha's birthday, 6:30 in the morning.
That's also online?
It's also online. So you'll find all those information with the post on the website. And April, right? 28, May 28, sorry. May 28, we have a retreat in Sudana Center in Ukiah. It will be 7 days retreat with dark powers, right? If you wish, the Jinchuan suggests to ASAP sign up because there are limited spaces where the people can find informations. Our website's also there. On our Berkeley Monastery website, you can find all the informations and you can sign up if you're interested to join. Okay. May every living beings if people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving unity, may our minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light dispel the darkness of our endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of painters into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and wise. Bowing respect to triple jewels.